Good evening, everyone. And now it's my privilege to welcome our esteemed speaker for this session. First, I would like to introduce with you Dr. Rishi Shukla, sir. Although he required no introduction at all, he is currently working as head of the Department of Endocrinology at Regency Hospital Limited, Kanpur, and chief consultant at the Center for Diabetes and Endocrine Disease, Kanpur. He has many publications to his name in international and national presentations and deliberations. His major areas of interest are diabetes education and social issues, especially with type 1 DM. He has been invited faculty in European Association for the Study of Diabetes, International Society for Pediatric and Adolescent Diabetes, and various other national organizations. He has been recipient for recognition award via Economic Times in 2018. He is member ESI RSDI recommendation for 2020. Other than the clinical practice, he has been running regular patient education programs for last 25 years by the organization Society for Prevention and Awareness of Diabetes in the city of Kanpur and in India. Welcome, Rishita. Now, I would like to introduce you our second speaker for this evening, Dr. Vivek Shankar. He is assistant professor at Department of Orthopedics, AIIMS, New Delhi. He has many publications in international and national journals to his name. He is member of Indian Orthopedic Association, Association of Spine Surgeons of India, Indo-American Spine Alliance, and North American Spine Society. He has a special interest in bone and spine disorder along with osteoporosis. Welcome, Dr. Vivek. Now, with this, I would like to hand over this session to Dr. Rishi sir, who is going to talk about how diabetes and bones are correlated. Over to you, Rishi sir.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant, for good words. And before I start, thank you very much, Mankind, entire team, Dr. Sandeep, and everyone for the opportunity. And you truly gave me a nice introduction. But when I introduce myself, my introduction is one-liner. I am a storyteller, and I try to make science as simple as possible. And my colleagues sometimes commented, "You make things too simple." So I'll try to make things simple so that we can use it in our day-to-day practice. And I have also learned while making this new presentations. I was sharing with Dr. Prashanta, I spoke on bone a couple of years back and I lost this. So let us start the story. Diabetes in India. The prevalence of diabetes in India is around 8.8%. This is the general understanding and latest data. And above 60 years, it is 13%. And some studies mention that above 25% prevalence in more than 60 years. So as age advances, the chances of diabetes increases. And this is a very interesting figure, and it was given by one of my friend. I was mentioning Dr. Vivek Ravindra Goswami. He wrote in an article, the prevalence is higher in low socioeconomic urban people than affluent urban class. So this is again a very interesting thing, that the low socioeconomic group. And I also noticed the person, the peon who has been working with me in my hospital for last 25 years, he's gained around 10, 12 kg of weight. And the type of food, actually good food is all fried food, or they don't have any understanding of food in lower socioeconomic group or a little above them. So this all makes them more prone. And what has happened in last 15, 20 years, all cycles have been replaced by either bikes or motorcycles, and now people are aspiring for car. So the physical work and all the most important thing is that these guys are also very hardworking. He starts his day at 8 o'clock and finishes by 10 o'clock. And this is happening with majority of class 4 or class 3 workers who work day and night, and their understanding is they work too hard. They work too hard, they spend a lot of time, but physical activity is not there. Coming to osteoporosis in India, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men, so around 33 and 20%. is the overall prevalence. Dr. Vivek might comment better on this. The prevalence of osteoporosis based on BMD, it was a South Indian study based on BMD was 22% on femoral neck and 59% based on lumbar spine in postmenopausal females. This is an article published in our Journal Endocrinology Metabolism recently. And look here, the males osteoporosis is the prevalence is around 22 and females around 49. So more than double between male and female. And overall it is 35. So if we mix osteoporosis and diabetes together, definitely there is addition. It is more than normal osteoporosis in the society. So is it a coincidence? We'll discuss. What is the basic definition of osteoporosis? It is a diffuse skeletal disease characterized by decreased bone mass and deterioration of bone microarchitecture, resulting in increased bone fragility and consequent increase in fragility risk. And what are the criteria? This is again interesting. If you do a bone BMD, bone mineral density or DEXA, not DEXA, the word we use DXA. T score, if you look, it is less than 0.25, which is considered as diagnostic of osteoporosis. And this is basically for men above 50 years. The perimenopausal and below, and men below 50, we use Z score. We have a standard curves, the bone mineral density in that age group. And if it is less than 2 standard deviation, we call risk factors. Children, I think it's not the platform to discuss. What are the fallacies in definition? The bone comprises of organic component around 30 to 40%, and BMD measures only inorganic component. So there may be fracture even with normal bone mineral density. And measurements at 3 sites. We usually measure 3 sites. The upper extremities, spine, and the femur does not necessarily represent our bone measurement. So there are a lot of fallacies, but still it works well, and we have been able to do a lot, and we have been able to catch and serve a lot of our patients. This is actually a very interesting curve. If you look at the bone mass, the lower line is female and the upper is for men, and as the age advances, so up to 22, 23 years, the bone mineral density keeps on increasing. Something similar happens to girls also, but they attain a lower strata. And as time passes, because of menopause, females start losing bone faster compared to men. But one new thing has observed that isolated low testosterone and many other conditions where we have just coincidentally started finding low BMD. We can discuss. The counterpart of it is, being endocrinologist, so I could not resist myself to share a small information. This is a chart of growth for bone and the height. There is a word known as height velocity. So left side, the peak mentions about height velocity. If you look here, this is the height velocity, which comes the maximum height potency is around 12 years in girls and around 13 and a half years in boys. But if you look at the bone peak comes little later, maybe 6 months to 1 year later. So idea is what, if you give all these people from our society, maybe our children, our nieces, nephews, grandchildren, calcium and vitamin D at this part and keep giving a reasonable amount of whatever is required, we are able to make a better bones of our country people. So this is what I wanted to say. If we want to intervene here, in terms of prevention, we can do a lot in terms of bones. What are the risk factors? The common risk factors are old age, being female, menopause, family history of osteoporosis is again important. Steroid is a very commonly used medicine. I'll discuss a little later. The undue doses of thyroid toxicity and hypothyroidism is a common problem. If patient persistently receives high doses of thyroxine, the chances of osteoporosis increases. Proton pump inhibitors, one medicine that is thiazole and dinidone, pioglitazone, is also known for osteoporosis, for long bone fractures. Various autoimmune disorders like ankylosing spondylitis, rheumatoid arthritis, SLE, endocrine disorders, hyperthyroidism I have mentioned. The testosterone, again, not the pure hypergonadotrophic or hypogonadism, but the isolated low testosterone is also noted. The independent risk factors for a fracture, age, prior fragility fracture, and low BMD, the family history, high fall, all these things. And here I would like to mention steroid. If any steroid is given more than 5 milligram for more than 3 months, the chances of osteoporosis is there. These patients, one must do the bone mineral test. The age-related disorders, as age advances, by and large, the calcium and the vitamin D consumption goes down, the absorption goes down, the estrogen goes down in females. Even in males, the testosterone goes down, which also plays a substantial role. However, estrogen is said to play a key role. So this all leads to reduced plasma calcium and eventually high PTH, parathyroid hormone, increased bone turnover, and the bone loss. Bone and diabetes. If you look at this curve, the upper line is bone mass, the same I showed you. But if you look at here, upper line is of the normal individual and the lower, the dotted one is diabetes. So at any age group, people with diabetes, B type 1, B type 2, later onset diabetes, or there are many varieties of diabetes, the chances of bone mineral mass is smaller. This is what I wanted to specify. Look at this bar, that on the left side panel, there are two. At the x-axis, there is a femoral neck density T-score, and the dotted lines and the hard lines. The dotted lines are diabetes with insulin, and the non-dotted line is without diabetes. So as age advances, the fracture risk increases, and the diabetics have always a higher risk. If you look at your right side of picture, the upper line is yellow is diabetes, and the green is non-diabetes. As age advances, when BMD is somewhere around 2.53, for same T-score, the diabetics have around twice the risk of having fractures. So that's where the diabetes is different. What is the link? A word about type 1 diabetes. It may be because of poor glycemic control or nephropathy or neuropathy. Sometimes GI disturbances also bring. And there are associations. Diabetes is associated with thyroid disorders, Graves' disease, or celiac disease, or uncontrolled diabetes at times is associated with amenorrhea, or there are various syndromes where diabetes is associated with delayed puberty. Then, because of neuropathy, there are increased risk of falls, poor vision is there, poor balance is there. Uncontrolled diabetes have very strong orthostatic hypotension, they are more likely to fall. So there are many things that diabetes is doing. This was about type 1, and in type 2, there is a word known as AGE, advanced glycosylation end products. This gets accumulated on collagen of free extracellular matrix, is thought to be underlying mechanism of diabetes. It gets deposited into the bone and accumulate with age and hyperglycemia, increase brittleness and lead to slow bone turnover. Advanced glycosylation end product can form covalent crosslinks throughout collagen fibrils, differentially affecting collagen stability and mechanical properties. Let us look, this is the summary of what diabetes is doing. The type 2 diabetes affects at the level of osteoclast formation, which leads to increased bone absorption. It affects at the osteoblast formation, leads to eventually leading to reduced bone formation. Bone microstructure is also affected. The mesenchymal cell differentiation is also affected, which leads to reduced bone formation. So overall, bone is weak. Bone strength is also reduced. So the bone quality also. So it affects at multiple level. And uncontrolled diabetes is more hypercalciuria. So then so many things that is happening. So there is a link between, and nowadays we are trying to think what is the link between bone and diabetes, what is the link between thyroid and diabetes, what is the link between hypo and hyperthyroid, what is the link between various other hormones. So this is what we are trying to look at it. Evaluation of bone turnover in patients with type 1 diabetes. Just look at the upper line. The conclusion in this study was based on the results of studying the T-score. It was found that in both male and female with diabetes in comparison with the control group, the bone density in the vertebrae was reduced. Obesity again is a very important factor, and because over 60% of diabetic patients are obese. And if you look here, these are the researchers from 1993. Dr. Vivek, you might be very young at that point of time. And as time is proceeding, it is till 2010. And if you look at 1993, the relationship of metabolic syndrome and bone health in human, the body size, waist and hip ratio, BMI and waist circumference were positively related with BMD. So that was the time when it was thought that possibly the obesity is a good thing for the health of bone. And look at the down two panels, the 2007 and 2010. Increased fat mass did not have a beneficial effect on bone mass. An obese individual had low lumbar BMD. So if you exclude the obesity, the overall bone health or BMD is lower in obese individuals, and around 60% of type 2 diabetes are having obesity. So their bone are likely to be bad, maybe because of diabetes, maybe because of obesity, because obesity produces lots of inflammatory markers which has some impact in terms of bone. Coming to vitamin D, diabetes and BMD. So this is a small study where this is type 1, type 2 and control. So compared to type 1, men and women, the bone density was on the lower side. The management of osteoporosis, vitamin D and diabetes. So there are different studies from 1992 to 2003 because now vitamin D is common. At that point of time in 90s, it was not so frequently prescribed. And by the replacement, what has been observed on the right side, if you look at relative risk of non-vertebral fractures or total fractures versus control, so a very significant reduction in relative risk, 0.75, 0.99, 0.46. So when you give vitamin D, there is a significant improvement in terms of management of osteoporosis and BMD. And one thing for sure, there is a strong association of vitamin D with fall and muscle strength. So this is again a very, very important. I mean, we do write a lot of vitamin D, but still we see a lot of patients with vitamin D deficiency. And what is happening when we write vitamin D to the patients, they take it and some of them say they feel good. And maybe after 6 months or 1 year, they stop medicines. Calcium in bone. Calcium intake is crucial for bone health, and up to 30% of population is CV deficient. This is a very recent data of our colleague Hari Narayan from Tirupati. And a word about management. The glycemic control is very, very important. It is one word, but goes a big way. I always tell all our diabetic patients to do 3 things. Always measure your blood sugar, always measure your blood pressure, always measure your weight. These 3 lines are actually very important, and we have given a slogan also. One of my younger colleague, Dr. Saurabh from my team, gave Napo to Janu. Because my understanding, if we are somehow able to emphasize, please measure your these 3 parameters as frequently as possible, and then work upon the feedback. Suppose your weight goes up or BP is more, then you need to act, or blood sugars are high or low, then you need to act. So these are very, very, very important parameters to control diabetes, because hyperglycemia per se, the understanding that we have evolved, creates more fractures, more chances of bone mineral density, more chances of fall. The physical activity, it is one word, but carries a big weight. And the observations have seen that there is 1 to 2% difference in BMD by regular physical activity. And my understanding is physical activity not only control diabetes, it takes care of osteoporosis, it makes muscle stronger, it has some cardioprotective properties, and it also, above all, it secretes endorphin. It makes you feel so good. So I believe there should be a very regular exercise program to improve muscle and bone health. Everybody, I think, whosoever develops diabetes or whomsoever bones are weak. Diet, a word about, I'll be mentioning that WHO recommends fruits and vegetables. And what WHO recommends, if you listen carefully, you'll understand. WHO says that every individual, irrespective of diabetes, should consume 5 helpings of 80 gram of fruits and vegetables. So maybe 2 helpings of fruits of 80 gram and 3 helpings of vegetable. Now you introspect, are we eating that much? Or are we asking our patients to have that much of fruits and vegetables? So this is where the problem is. The supplements. The calcium is 1200 milligram of elemental calcium for all females above 50 and males above 70 years, and 1000 milligram for all males. Calcium carbonate is by and large commonly prescribed calcium. And 500 milligram contains, if I recall, around 300 milligram of elemental calcium. Vitamin D, B12 deficiency is also very commonly seen. D is also seen, but B12 is also seen, and I've reviewed the data very recently. So B1, B6, B3, all these vitamins we are not consuming that much, and the sole reason I give the amounts of fruits and vegetables we are consuming. So I think we can encourage, I'll not say replace all these fancy medicine, but replace from diet, because diet not only provides if you give vitamins directly and if you give vitamins through fruit, the antioxidant effect are likely to be very different. Hormone replacement, again very important. I always ask in our regular practice to all females below 50 the menstrual history. And to my surprise, there are many females who have had premature ovarian failure. They have had menopause before 40. And if there is a menopause before 40, chances of weaker bones are there, chances of fractures are there. So we need to catch testosterone. What has been seen, I have mentioned in earlier also, that testosterone is very strongly, as when we talk of menopause, we talk of andropause, but testosterone is associated with diabetes more frequently. It is more than a coincidence. Many patients with type 2 diabetes have low testosterone and they need hormone replacement. They have osteoporosis. The thyroid replacement doses, I've already talked. Appropriate thyroid hormone doses. If anybody is having thyroid, see that their thyroid functions are maintained in the range. Look for thyroid use in fast and this is one line I would like to again say, because thyroid many times we miss in busy practice. People take it anytime, many times, and even hidden use of steroids. I made it red for the reason, because this, sir, I take this medicine, I take that herbal medicine. Many times if you ask, show me that medicine, and after 6 months or 3 months, that guy will come and show you a tablet of dexamethasone. So steroid is notoriously affecting bones, and we don't know. Some people have some allergic reaction and then they drastically respond and they keep on taking for decades together. Now a new thing where steroid is post-COVID. Many of post-COVID patients, because of fibrosis, lung fibrosis, the steroids are being prescribed. So if they are prescribed for long, beware of osteoporosis. First, anti-diabetic medicines. One medicine I would like to say is pioglitazone. It is associated with long fractures. So any lady with fracture, any lady with premature organ failure, any hypogonadtrations, please do not prescribe pioglitazone. SGLT2 inhibitors are very, very important and useful, and that uses are going beyond diabetes. Dapagliflozin has been blamed, but the recent studies are showing that possibly it is not associated. The treatment part of osteoporosis, when to treat. The mathematical understanding is anybody above BMD more than 2.5 should be treated. And if history of fracture or steroid or premature ovarian failure, even with less than 2.5, you should treat. Even with osteopenia and history of fracture, one should be treated. The therapies, specific therapies at osteoclast level or at the level of resorption suppression, bisphosphonates. The three bisphosphonates are available: alendronate, weekly basis, residonate, monthly, and zoledronic acid, IV injection once a month, 5 milligram. Denosumab is a new molecule, and this is a human monoclonal antibody that inhibits receptor activator of nuclear factor Kb ligand and thus reduces osteoclast activity. I'll share how it works, and the doses are 60 milligram 6 monthly for 2 years. Any anti-resorptimer like alendronate by and large are not given for more than 5 years. This is all anti-resorptive medicine, and what they do, they reduce the osteoclastic activity and eventually the osteoblastic activity increases. Denosumab is a very important group of medicines, and the rankle ligand, this gets attached with the receptors on bone and activates the osteoblast. And denosumab, this molecule comes actually in between the two, and thus it inhibits the osteoporosis. At osteoblastic level, we have one injection that is known as teriparatide. I think more than 20 years, 20 microgram. Now we have biosimilars available, 20 microgram per day, and it is given for 1 to 2 years. And how does it work? Initially, small doses of teriparatide, it increases resorption. If you give in continuous fashion, it down regulates and it gives the osteoblastic effect. And to sum up, diabetes and bone both are common problems. Their coexistence is more than a coincidence. Preventive measures play a very vital role. Regular exercise, vitamin D supplementation, pick up them much earlier. We must offer treatment to them. And last line, I believe, is very important for those physicians, because orthopedic surgeons, they write medicine for short term, we write medicine for long term. So we must explain pill load to all people with diabetes. What happens whenever we give a prescription? Very recently, I wrote editorial in one of the journal about lipids. And what happened? We write, see, every diabetic above 40 years should be given one lipid lowering agent. And what happens? We give medicines, and maybe 6 months later, when patient comes back, he takes only anti-diabetics and antihypertensive. He inquires from medical store or his doctors and says that all these medicines are of no use. So once we explain what is the use of statins, what is the use of vitamin D, what is the use of calcium, what is the use of all medicine we are writing, possibly the compliance will be better. Because in a chronic practice, a very common complaint is, doctor, my medicines are too much. Will you reduce my medicine? When will you reduce my medicine? With this, thanks a lot. These are the photographs I took during COVID. I mean, look at the beautiful moon and the temple here, a place nearby to my place. This is a beautiful thing. I could see life beautifully. But take care of yourself. We are running into very crucial and critical phase in life. With this, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you. Take care. I think it's the time. Prashant, you will come or Dr. Vivek will come directly?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Rishi, sir. Now I will request Dr. Vivek, sir, to kindly share his PPT. Then, sir, question answer, sir, we will take in the end, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant and Dr. Shukla. It was a very, very nice presentation. You have covered all the topics which I may have missed. I would be talking mostly about the problem that patients with diabetes face, and not just osteoporotic fractures and fractures related to low BMD and BMI. My talk will comprise of the musculoskeletal manifestations of diabetes, which include spinal disorders, disorders of joint mobility, neuropathies, and diabetic muscle infections. So I'll go very shortly about all these. Now the spine problems, the most common is the DISH. The full form of DISH is diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis, and it's commonly seen as type 1 diabetes. It's characterized by new bone formation, mostly in thoracolumbar vertebra, and there is calcification of the spinal ligaments, both anteriorly and posteriorly, mainly anterior. The degree of glycemic control does not correlate with the symptoms, and the patient usually is likely linked to high level of insulin or insulin-like growth factors. So the presentation is the patient may have normal mobility of the spine, but they are mostly asymptomatic with mild morning stiffness. There are 16% of the affected may develop dysphagia uh, because of the anterior longitudinal ligament is ossified, and it also affects bones of skull, pelvis, heels, and elbows. Now, sometimes the patient could confuse with DISH to ankylosing spondylitis. There's a very varied and very significant difference between ankylosing spondylitis and DISH. The syndesmophytes are marginal in DISH, whereas they are marginal in ankylosing spondylitis. The radiograph shows flowing candle wax appearance, whereas in ankylosing spondylitis, here, if you see, it's like a bamboo spine. This space is preserved in DISH, whereas they are fairly ossified in ankylosing spondylitis. Osteopenia is not present, whereas osteopenia is present in ankylosing spondylitis. The association of HLA in DISH is HLA B27 is not associated, whereas HLA B8 is present in only diabetic, and this is very specific to diabetes. Whereas in ankylosing spondylitis, HLA B27 is highly associated. The age at which the presentation occurs is middle age and old age, where the diabetic present with DISH, and the ankylosing spondylitis is mostly in the younger population. The SI joint is fairly spared in DISH, whereas ankylosing spondylitis, the SI joint is invariably involved bilaterally. So the non-operative treatment is activity modification, physical therapy, bracing, at times NSAID and bisphosphonate therapy. But the primary goal is to control the diabetes, because it halts the progression of the disease process. The operatives, of course, is reserved for specific sequelae where there is lumbar stenosis, cervical myelopathy development, or any adult spinal deformity, where we do spinal decompression and stabilization like this. Coming to the upper extremity, the most common problem that patients face is adhesive capsulitis, or which is commonly known as frozen shoulder. There's a functional loss of passive and active range of motion without any underlying cause, and the incidence of frozen shoulder in diabetic patient is about 11 to 30%. So every patient who has a diabetes with a long-standing diabetes almost will, or 130 out of 100 patients will suffer at any given point of that disease or suffering of the disease. They will have a bout or two bouts of frozen shoulder. Patient with type 1 diabetes has a higher rate of adhesive capsulitis as compared to type 2 diabetes. But that is not uncommon. It is very common in type 2 diabetes. So the patient may present with diabetes, and you have to suspect, if the patient comes to you with disability and with decreased range of motion of the shoulder, you have to suspect and investigate the patient for having diabetes. The diagnosis of diabetes must have been or may have been missed. So no response to treatment if diabetes is uncontrolled, and the younger population age of presentation is bad prognosis. So this is always usually clinically it presents with incidence onset and range of, decrease in range of motion. There is varying stage pain, but there are 3 stages. When there is freezing, where there is an incidence onset of pain at rest and difficulty in sleeping. When the shoulder goes into frozen state, whether there is pain is less, but there is significant restriction of the movement, and then the pain is gone in the later stage, and the movement improved, but it never becomes normal. So the treatment is to restrict and control the diabetes. Now, non-operative is of course strict diabetic control. Patient is given physiotherapy, range of motion exercises, wheel exercises for the shoulder, NSAID, intra-articular injections of steroid is given only after there is strict diabetic control. Heat therapy and cryotherapy may be tried. Operative intervention is of course manipulation and the anesthesia is done in patients who do not improve after a short bout of conservative management. Later stage arthroscopic or open capsular release may be required, but it's very uncommon. Coming to the hand, it's called limited joint mobility syndrome. It is very common in diabetic patient where there is thick, tight, waxy skin on the dorsal aspect of the hand with flexion deformity of the MCP and IP joints. It is most commonly seen in type 1 diabetic with a prevalence of 8 to 50%. So the patient presents is like a prayer sign, where the inability of the 2 palms to come completely together with the wrist maximally flexed. In the early stages, there is paresthesia and slight pain of the MCP and the carpometacarpal joint, but there is over a period of time they become limited range of motion, and usually the limited joint movement is associated with Dupuytren's contracture. The treatment is anti-inflammatory medication, joint and muscle stretching exercises, but diabetic control is of paramount. Dupuytren's contracture is a palmar and distal thickening and tethering and contracture of the hand. It is present in about 20 to 68% in long-standing uncontrolled diabetes. Ring and middle finger are most commonly affected in diabetic patients, and they present with decrease in motion and painful nodule of the affected finger, and MCP joint and PIP joint contracture as seen in the picture. So the non-operative treatment is of course the diabetic control. We give physiotherapy, hand exercises, stretching exercises of that finger. We give heat therapy. Sometimes Clostridium injection is given and a needle epidurotomy is done, but mostly after the complete development of the Dupuytren contracture, surgical dissection and fasciotomy may be required. It's done in this case. Carpal tunnel syndrome is also very common in diabetic patient, where the incidence is about 11 to 16%, and there is compression of the median nerve within the carpal tunnel. There is paresthesia of the median nerve distribution, Tinel and Fennel signs may be positive, and is primarily a clinical diagnosis. And the patient usually comes and presents to you that I have numbness when I wake up in the morning and I'm unable to hold my toothbrush. So treatment is of course analgesics, splints, at night bracing like this one, and then local steroid injection may be given after strict control of diabetics. Surgery is indicated for those patients who failed with conservative management and the carpal tunnel release is done. Trigger finger is another problem which diabetic patient fails, and about 10% patient present with trigger finger where there is flexor tenosynovitis which causes fibrosis of the tendon sheath, which leads to limitation of the normal movement of the tendon, and there is a clicking sound of the finger opens with a click. So the finger becomes locked in severe cases and pain at level of A1 pulleys. Notice non-operative treatments, of course, diabetic control, splinting, stretching exercises, NSAID, and sometimes corticosteroid injection is given, whether it's primarily an operative intervention with percutaneous release of A1 pulleys done. Now coming to the foot problems, diabetic foot is another very common and very severe problem in diabetic patients. There is this is because of the poor vascularity and sensations. They're susceptible to ulceration, infection, neuropathy, and fractures. 15% of lifetime risk of developing diabetic patient in patients who are suffering from uncontrolled diabetes. There are 10% of those with ulcer have distal amputation, and 1% to 2% going to major amputation in an uncontrolled diabetic patient. So it is very important to assess the diabetic foot. Early signs of neuropathy is reduced and loss of ankle jerk reflex. Peripheral neuropathy can also be identified by Siemens-Wilson monofilament test. And every physician should know this, that there is, with this very simple test, from normal to loss of sensation, if you test it properly, you will know that the amount of sensory loss. Now, from grade 0 to grade 5, there is no ulcer, but foot is at risk. To educate and advise better foot care, examination of the foot every evening when we go home, and because the peripheral neuropathy develops, they should know that which is warm water, which is cold water, and they should not keep their foot and wash their foot in warm water. So superficial ulcers, then there is wound care and antibiotic given. And in grade 4 where there is gangrene of the foot and forefoot develops, and wide debridement and amputation may be required in 4 and 5. Again, total contact cast, which is a kind of plaster which is given to relieve pressure soles and pressure points. In Wenger grade 1 and 2 require frequent follow-up and weekly cast change. And complication induced because of the new peritibial malleolar foot ulcers, you have to keep it changing, keep a very close watch on these patients. There are prefabricated pneumatic walking braces are available, which are called SP walkers, which are available. And these are pressure adjustable air blades lined with soft nylon material, and it prevents abrasions and ulcerations, and this can be given. Coming to Charcot neuropathy, this is an advanced form of diabetic foot where there is destruction of the bone. So there is progressive non-infectious disease seen in person with sensory neuropathy, and diabetes is the most common. So there are two philosophy or two theory behind it. One is the neurotraumatic theory, where there's loss of neuroprotective mechanism because of the neuropathy, and there is repetitive microtrauma which leads to this. There another theory says that there is sympathetic neuropathy, catalyst osteoclast bone resorption, and then is fragmentation which leads to this. So the presentation is usually swollen and foot and ankle pain about 50%, and there is patient comes with painless deformed foot. There is acute. In acute, there is swelling, warmth, and redness. Whereas in chronic, there is structural deformity, lots of arch, and the ankle may be unstiff. You get an X-ray done. In the early cases, you see only degenerative changes, where in late cases, there is fragmentation, scattered bone chunks, and there is complete loss of the normal architecture of the ankle joint of the foot. The MRI is very sensitive to diagnose abscess and osteomyelitis if you suspect any infectious infection. So there are classification. There are 3 stages, and I'll go through. There's in stage 0, there is only joint edema. Radiographs are fairly okay. Bone scan may be positive in all stages, but in stage 1, you see fragmentation of the bone and bone resorption as seen in this one. There's only fragmentation of little bones and bone resorption, and there is small fractures and dislocation of the ankle. When there is grade 2, there is coalescence and there is bone debris is present, and there is loss of Gayson and the volar angle. So you see the forefoot, this is completely going into destruction. And in stage 3, there is remodeling, where the bone, the foot is now becoming remodeled, and they have completely lost the bone architecture. So the treatment is, of course, first and foremost is treat diabetic control, avoid any pressure or promote ambulation, contact casting and crow boot or Charcot resistant orthopedic walker. This is called CRO. And of course, medication like bisphosphonate, antidepressant, and neuropathic pain management may be given to the patient who presents with pain. In treatment, resection of the bony prominences and TA lengthening may be required at times. If there is deformity, then there is arthrodesis and osteotomy may be required. And it's seldom, very few cases, when there is complete destruction and there are bony ulcers and then there is osteomyelitis, then the patient may require amputation. The other problems type diabetic myopathy. There is weakness and muscle wasting. A lot of time you will see a patient who has got this kind of picture of foot, and this is kind of very diagnostic that you will ask, do you have diabetes? So there is diffuse proximal lower muscle pain and asymmetrical loss of the tender jerk, typically in older and type 2 diabetes associated with weight loss, sometimes as much as 40%. Treatment is strict diabetic control. There is physiotherapy of the muscles and of the lower limb, and improvement in grade is often incomplete, and the skin changes are often permanent. Then there is diabetic muscle infarction. It's commonly in type 1 diabetes, acute onset of pain and swelling, most commonly affecting thigh muscle and calf muscles. Serum creatine levels may be elevated. Sometimes we need to do biopsy and manage with antiplatelet inflammatory. Then the problem the diabetic patient faces after a very minor trauma is reflex sympathetic dystrophy, or commonly known as RSD. Now it is characterized by pain which is out of proportion of the inciting cause. Like you have a very small trauma, very small fracture. The fracture is healed, but the pain is still there and it's just not going away, and it's making the limb unfunctional. So it is because of the vasomotor instability. There is tropic changes, regional osteoporosis may be seen, and functional impairment is almost complete in this case. The condition may occur spontaneously without and after some trauma also. So the clinical picture is like pain, which is occurring in one or more extremity, as described as severe, consistent burning, and is deep aching. All tactile sensation. Touch will also give you a sensation of pain. Wearing of clothes will give you a sensation of pain. So all tactile sensation will give sensation of pain in this. Skin changes are very prominent, like there may be dystrophy or atrophy kind of skin changes. Hair may be initially grow coarse and then become thin. Nails in the affected extremity may become more brittle, go faster in the initially, and then they become growing slower. There are rashes, ulcer, and pustules may present. Increased sweating, pseudomotor changes, and increased chilling of the skin with goose flesh movement. The treatment is NSAID, alpha blockers, beta blockers, and bisphosphonate, vitamin C for prevention, antidepressant, nerve stimulation, and nerve blocks may be applied at sometimes, and restricted physical therapy, which is most important. If you suspect a patient is having diabetic and you suspect RST, get a bone scan done, document it, and restrict the movement of the. Give NSAID, give alpha blockers, give antidepressants, vitamin C, and do not ask the patient to go and do exercises or physiotherapy. That will increase the symptoms. And sometimes, very fewer times, it becomes surgical symptomatectomy maybe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Vivek. Thank you, Rishi sir. Now we can, I mean, sir, if you have any comments, sir, or we can go ahead with the question answer session, sir.
It was a wonderful presentation, Dr. Vivek, and much required and less discussed presentation. And I believe it should be very useful to all my colleagues. I also learned a couple of things from this because I've been discussing, I mean, when I did my endocrinology from PGI Chandigarh, the limited joint mobility was a thesis with me. So I remember at that point of time. So it was wonderful, and I think a very useful, offbeat but very useful. Sometimes lateral things are not very useful. This was a very useful topic. Thank you, Prashant, and thank you, Dr. Vivek, for the presentations. I think now
Sir, thank you to you, sir. Thank you to you and Dr. Vivek for having this tremendous knowledgeable session, sir. And so that is why, sir, we have, I mean, plenty of questions. So I will start with one of the basic question which just came. How long? I mean, calcium prescription for how long? So that is, I guess, it's always
forever. One line forever.
Forever. Okay.
One line forever. Calcium and vitamin D in replacement doses forever. I told you in my talk, 30% of Indians are not taking. When I was calculating how much calcium is in our diet, there used to be exercise. I remember my DM program, that was not a computerized test, Dr. Vivek. We used to calculate 100 gram wheat will have how much calcium, 100 gram rice will have how much calcium. So we started from that. And that thing is still in my mind. And the baseline calcium consumption is very less. And if by and large it does not give renal stones, number one, if there is a hypercalciuria, 24 hours calcium more than 200, that is the point. You should restrict calcium. Otherwise, no need. Calcium should be given to everyone. And more so it is required, I emphasize, the growing children, 10 to 20 years of age, if we give to our children. I would like to be able to comment on that as well. The calcium and vitamin D and high protein diet are possibly very useful.
Absolutely, sir, because now the children are playing indoors and playing on mobile and iPad more than going out and playing tennis or football. So it becomes more important for them to consume calcium more. For the older age group, I would suggest that in India we are a spice eating country, and so a lot of people, and as sir has put in his presentation, a lot of people are taking PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, or commonly the pantoprazole and Rantac, over a counter, and they just keep on popping that. What happens is, if you take one PPI over 1 week, the calcium absorption from your gut decreases. So even if you take one PPI in a week time, the calcium, particularly the calcium carbonate absorption, decreases very much, because it depends, the calcium carbonate absorption from the gut depends upon the acidity. Only if the gastric environment is acidic, it will be absorbed. So what I profess now is that calcium citrate, which is independent of pH, absorption is independent of pH. So the profess is the calcium citrate, though the absorption of calcium citrate is lesser than calcium carbonate, but because Indian population has got a habit of popping pantoprazole and Rantac very frequently, I would give calcium citrate instead of calcium carbonate. I would like to comment on from sir.
Very intelligent piece of advice. I appreciate. Yes, Dr. Prasad.
Thank you, sir. Sir, okay. So now, sir, we come to a next question, I guess, for Dr. Vivek. Is it okay, I mean, to prescribe calcium for each and every individual over 40 years of age?
Absolutely, because as sir has said, the calcium absorption or any absorption from your body decreases over a period of time. So the body has got, if you talk theoretically, we from 0 to 20 years are in an anabolic phase of our life. Everything is increasing. Your muscle mass is increasing. Your absorption is good. Everything is good. From 20 to 30, 35, it is in a plateau phase. So you have balanced. From 40, you are in a catabolic phase of your life. You are not increasing. You are in a catabolic phase of life. So the absorption gradually decreases. So at that point of time, if you give calcium, if you give vitamin D, and because of the kind of socio-economic structure that we have, we tend to keep indoors, don't go out and play. We have more machines to work for us. So that is why it is important to give calcium and vitamin D beyond, from 40 years to 55, 60 years. And if you give that, the baseline calcium where you were supposed to develop osteoporosis in perimenopausal age group and in age group of 60 years in men, there, if you are giving calcium and vitamin D from the age of 40 years, your bone health is better at that time. So you are actually very healthier when you in your older or older age group.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Even at 40s, you are young, but your bone is going down. So this is the message. Yes.
Rishi sir, sir, this question is, most of the physicians, I mean, what they prescribe basically, if there is any deficiency, calcium deficiency, I mean, whether they should go with calcium and vitamin D both, or is calcium only sufficient?
I think most of the
or vitamin D is sufficient. I mean, in
most of the calcium is associated with vitamin D. So this is one thing, because they have, I think, 100 IU, so 3000 IU, 100 IU per tablet. So 300 into 30. 3000 IU will in any case go. But I usually replace, a practical thing is replace one pouch of 60,000 once a month. So this I consider as a maintenance on top of calcium and vitamin D combination.
So Most of the calcium carbonate and calcium citrate combination which are coming in the market has got 200 micrograms with every tablet. So that comes to about 60,000 international units per month. But what I do is in my practice is that I give eight sachet of weekly calcium, vitamin D along with calcium. So that if there is any deficiency, and because it's a water soluble vitamin, get washed away. If there is any deficiency, it will just absorb, and then once a month is what I do.
This is actually, you are very right. This is actually the protocol for vitamin D deficient patients.
Yes.
When you do it with the intention to not deteriorate bone. I mean, this is, so if there is any deficiency, weekly 8 pouches, then maintains once a month forever.
Thank you, sir. Rishi sir, the one question is that in regards to pioglitazone use in diabetic patients, so does adding calcium or vitamin D, is there any chances of having lesser side effect with pioglitazone? I mean, pioglitazone along with calcium and vitamin D.
Pioglitazone otherwise is a very good molecule. It has had some anti-atherosclerotic effect, and there was a trial in 2006 on target trial, and PCOS it is useful, and NASH it is useful. Only contraindication is, I mean, we routinely give calcium and vitamin D to all our diabetic patients, and I mentioned in my concluding slide in some of that, we need to spend some time with patient, because patient is already having 1, 2, 3 anti-diabetic agents, 1, 2, 3 antihypertensive agents, 1 statin, then maybe 1 thyroid medicines, then some other GI supportive medicines. The medicine number goes down and he's fed up. But once patient understands this is for his well-being, he will continue. So this is one part. Second thing is with pioglitazone, only if there is a history of long bone fractures, or if there is history of premature ovarian failure, and at times pioglitazone gives refractory anemia. So if these things are there, then be cautious, don't give. Otherwise, you can give pioglitazone. And as said with pioglitazone, there is no additional supplementation of calcium and vitamin D. You should treat it like as any other anti-diabetic agent.
I have a question, sir. Do you give pioglitazone in patients who are rheumatoid?
I never thought about this, Dr. Vivek.
Even rheumatoid have, osteoporotic, high level of osteoporosis, and that's why.
Osteoporosis we actually don't give. Osteoporosis, that's why I told you. Osteoporosis, premature ovarian failure, and any history of long bone fractures, we don't give. Rheumatoid, I don't know, because we have one more medicine that has come into basket, is a hydroxychloroquine, which has been quite discussed nowadays with COVID. But and it has been approved by Government of India, DCGI, as a third line medicine, as a blood sugar lowering medicine. So whenever there is a polyarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis with anti-diabetic, we prefer adding this, because it has some blood sugar lowering effect and some cardioprotective properties also.
Thank you, sir. Sir, is there any need of extra calcium or vitamin D in a diabetic patient, or just like a normal person only?
See, if it is uncontrolled, there is hypercalciuria. So possibly you need little more.
Okay.
Instead of 1200 milligram, you need 1400 or so. But if it is controlled, the need is likely to be the same. But at least replace it, because diabetics, if you differentiate, even with controlled diabetics or uncontrolled diabetics, controlled diabetes at any stage compared to normal population, they have weaker bones. So even with controlled diabetes, the bones of calcium and vitamin D supplementation is the best. Even with control, and uncontrolled, it becomes all the more important.
Thank you, sir. So there is one more question about inhaled steroid and their effect on BMD. Either of you want?
No, I'll answer. Actually, Dr. Vivek is where whole history is actually involving with me. I was talking to Dr. Guleria one day. I said, your DM, because that was the time only PGI Chandigarh had DM in pulmonary medicine. He's 2-3 years, I think, senior to me. And which batch you are from? And I recall, because that was the time. Why am I talking all this? When 25 years back, the understanding was inhaled steroid don't come into system and then they don't spoil the bones. Now we have clear-cut studies that inhaled steroid affects bones and gives osteoporosis. So give minimal doses of inhaled steroids as soon as possible. Try to change some other alternate medicines. This is one message I would like to give. Try, avoid, don't give inhaled steroids unnecessarily and forever.
Thank you, sir. Sir, what is the role of exercise in a person, I mean, suffering from osteoporosis?
I mentioned that exercise improves 1 to 2 or 3% of bone density. It reduces, it increases muscle strength. It reduces chances of fall. It controls blood sugar. It controls blood pressure. It protects your heart. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of pleiotropic benefits. I mean, I'm a very high fan of exercise. I'm a workaholic. I love working and exercise. So, and I'm a very strong supporter of diabetes education and lifestyle. So this is, I think, in every specialty and play a big role.
And so recently one paper was published. I mean, it was clearly mentioning that more exercise you do, more is the fall in the HbA1c.
I think there should be a plateau level. It's not that if you do, say standard is 150 minutes per week, you can do it double, but you cannot do it 4 times to reduce it. I mean, a lot of patients coming to us, they are overexcited and enthusiastic, newly detected diabetic, Dr. Vivek, and they say, I'll work for 4 hours. And I have people who walk 20 kilometers per day, but their sugar is uncontrolled. So the one line I would say, those who are voracious walker or exerciser, they have a mindset that they will not have anything. This is bad. They are little better than the normal society, but they need to take care of their metabolic illnesses.
They are not immortal.
It's a very double-edged sword, I would say. Why? Because of there are 2 factors. One factor is because of the mushrooming of the uncontrolled gymming centers around India, and because of the hype about going to the gym and the good factors, the good feeling, and the social factor, the selfies available with that. No, that's true, sir. So
I agree.
So what happens is, if you every age got certain exercises that need to be done, and at 55 years of age, I don't expect you to do a sprinting and lift 100 kg of weight. What you should be doing, you should be doing a brisk walking, and maybe between the brisk walking, a little bit of jogging. So the exercise, if you do it in an uncontrolled manner, it is counterproductive at any given point, and without knowing your own body, and sometimes by the push of the trainer or by the uneducated trainer which are available in the gyms. So I have seen patient who comes to us with different kind of problems, who has gone to the gym and they have tried to lift 100 kg, and they have have shoulder problem, frozen shoulder, and things like that. So even the patient even the people who go for jogging and running, it is said that after 55 years of age, if you do not jog, it is okay, because the muscle strength is going down over a period of time. You should do brisk walking, do quadricep exercises, static and dynamic quadricep exercises at home, so that you do not fall, because the reflex has decreased. So that is why I always say to my patient, do it within the limit of your tolerance.
Thank you, Dr. V.
Buddha's philosophy, understand and harmony and middle path. I think here lies the yes.
Yes, sir. And sir, this is the last question, and because we are, I mean, currently in between the pandemic of this COVID-19, so there was one paper actually recently published, and which says the role of, I mean, the majority of the hospitalized patient due to COVID-19 were actually having hypocalcemia.
Mhm.
So, sir, do you feel is there any connection between calcium supplement, calcium concentration and severity of the symptoms?
I don't because I'm not dealing directly with ICU patient. I see a lot of treated patients.
Yes, sir.
So and then I'm not seeing, but one word I can say about COVID is we are still in phase of learning, and my understanding is it can affect the cytokine storm can affect any organ out of, because we have started seeing the subacute thyroiditis. So not why not subacute parathyroiditis? So I don't know. I'm assuming this, and the overall septicemia is there, and sepsis is the ultimate. Sepsis per se can give rise to calcium. See, low calcium, low albumin are very bad prognostic markers for overall recovery.
Thank you,
I
sir.
think if you can comment, Dr. Vivek.
No, I've no experience in this,
Yeah.
sir, so I may not be able to comment.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, that was the last question. And now, before we go and end the session, any last words from Rishi sir and Dr. Vivek?
So it was a very wonderful presentation by Rishi sir, and I learned a lot of aspects of diabetes and related topics. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for appreciation, Vivek. And I made a small policy. If anybody appreciates, feel happy. So thank you. You made my weekend. I'm feeling so good. And take care. We'll meet some physically sometimes. And till then, one message I would like to say to all my friends: if you have any chronic illness, don't skip your medicines. And if ask all of your patients not to stop medicine. Please continue medicines and take care. Now we are running into very critical phase of life. Take care and be safe. All the best and thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of Mankind Pharma, I really like to highlight that part. It was really wonderful talk, sir, with good question answer session. Also, I guess most of the questions, we have taken, and doctor must have, they got their answers. So really, thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Vivek.
So
Thank
Vivek,
you,
will I
Dr. Rishi.
request you sometimes in future to deliver a talk on same topic?
Sure, sir. Definitely.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, and have a nice good night, sir.